The Decadent in love with his Psychopomp, Thomas Mann's Death in Venice, and Adrian Lyne's Lolita. The reinvention of the Child-Muse and the downfall of the Decadent. A quote by Schiff. You have to be an artist, a madman, full of shame and melancholy and despair, in order to recognize the little deadly demon among the others. She stands unrecognized by them, unconscious of herself, of her fantastic power. Unquote. Humbert and Aschenbach more or less put their muses to paper. Humbert knows about his demon, but Aschenbach is more blindfolded. What both of them do, nevertheless, is constantly compare them to literary or mythological characters. This multi-layered characterization of their muses lets the quote beguiled lovers unquote blur their vision of them as children. They metamorphose them in order to legitimize their sexuality and justify their art. Matthew Winston argues that, quote, the book's protagonist, narrator, and supposed author, Humbert, continually forces us to maintain a double perspective by calling on us to pass moral and legal judgment upon him as a man and aesthetic judgment upon him as an artist, unquote. Mann and Nabokov introduced the daring and double-edged theme of, quote, forbidden love, unquote, legally and socially prohibited, emotionally almost incurable. The reason why one can behold them as humans with a conscience is precisely their decadence. They are tormented by their innate sexuality that they did not choose. Max Nordau states that, quote, degenerates are not always criminals, prostitutes, anarchists, and pronounced lunatics. They are often authors and artists, unquote, which is reinforced by Mann's rather self-critical and pessimistic belief that, quote, the empire of art is expanding and the empire of health and innocence is shrinking on earth, unquote. Quote, yet Humbert is curiously trapped by his own predilection for seeing his life through a veil of literature, unquote, which implies that Humbert, with his nature, feels sheltered in the non-hypocritical realm of literature, not in a strictly coded and unapologetic society. He embellishes his life and actions with literary elements to make himself feel more at ease. He can accept himself more as a literary character than a real person, and he could love Lolita less devastatingly if she only were his literary heroine. This might explain Nabokov's statement that, quote, his moral defense of the book is the book itself, unquote. Humbert needs embellished language to extenuate the monstrous, shocking, and unacceptable in his life. The injurious consequences of Aschenbach's Platonic and Socratic Phaedric ascriptions to love are merely directed against himself. He constructs this philosophical and Greek mythological universe around him, and Tajou to live out his passions at least in one sphere and without harming, quote, his lovely one, unquote. Mann explains that, quote, in truth, art is only a means of fulfilling my life ethically, unquote. Winston further analyzes that, quote, since Humbert needs to impose upon his life the fixity of a literary work, he later attempts to force Lolita into the invariable pattern of a literary character, and therein lies his crime and his sin, unquote. Humbert certainly wants Lolita unchanged, but even after her evasion, her sexual intercourse with another man, and her pregnancy, he, quote, knew that the hopelessly poignant thing was not Lolita's absence from his side, but the absence of her voice from that chorus, unquote. What Winston calls Humbert's crime is basically the desperate aspiration of a world where his love is not evil and detrimental, where the effects of his passion do not destroy Lolita. Since Annabelle's death, putridity and love are the binary forces that determine his life and downfall. Practically seen, his sin is that he treats Lolita according to his literary mindset, which is full of beauty on the outside, falling apart on the inside. Quote, Humbert wishes to negate Lola, Dolly, and Dolores, and, just as he wants her always in his arms, he wants her to be always and only Lolita, unquote. Aschenbach contextualizes Tajou with Greek myths. He calls him, quote, little Phaeton, unquote, Narcissus, and constantly compares him to perfect Greek statues. He objectifies and literalizes him and, as a result, burdens him with the exigent illusion of perfection. Tajou represents a, quote, divine solemnity, unquote, for him to look at. He even imagines him as Venus by stating that Tajou's, quote, lively adolescent figure, seductive and chaste, lovely as a tender young god, emerging from the depths of the sky and the sea, unquote, makes him feel strangely moved. The, quote, extraordinarily graceful, unquote, boy with childlike yet delicate hands, poor health, and childlike bashfulness becomes almost surreal without any kind of interaction. Aschenbach claims that this, quote, truly godlike beauty possessed by this mortal child was the face of Eros, quote, a masterpiece, a feast for the eyes, and a worthy object of deeper sympathy that needs to be taken seriously beyond his years, unquote. Tajou is characterized through imposing oppositions. On the one hand, he has the looks of a god, and on the other hand, he is a mortal child. This, quote, noble human figure, unquote, conjures up, quote, mythic images, unquote, and, quote, poetic legends, unquote, in Aschenbach, who develops an introverted paternal kindness towards this boy. The afflicted dreamer observes the youthfully perfect body, the pure form of divine thought, only from a distance like a picture. Aschenbach needs Tajou to make him feel alive and creative. Only through the boy's physical presence the writer suddenly feels that he can feel. He evokes appraised images, which he can then project onto the boy, feeling besotted and then retransforming the gained emotion into literature. Quote, a writer's chief joy is that thought can become all feeling, that feeling can become all thought, unquote. He, quote, uses the boy's physical frame as the model for his writing, unquote, and to, quote, carry his beauty into the realm of intellect, unquote, but he forgets that Tajou is not as powerless and sick as he might seem. After all, Aschenbach is the one who is dying of this passion, quote, that held him fastened as if by a chain, unquote, and because, quote, he pursues the beloved object that inflamed him. Aschenbach is a, quote, powerless victim of the demon, unquote, of the, quote, stranger god, unquote. Quote, the murderer, madman, and pedophile is balanced against the artistic creator, stylist, lover of language, and master of literary illusion, unquote. Both Aschenbach and Humbert are, quote, infatuated and errant lovers and infatuated thinkers. They both succumb to the, quote, biological decline taking place within, having seen the yellow, physically handicapped ugliness that nonetheless managed to kindle its smoldering ardor into a pure flame, managed even to catapult itself to mastery in the realm of beauty, unquote. They both have long-suffering faces. Despite their thoughts and actions, they have a flagellating conscience. If they were monsters without a past, emotions, or traumata, they would look differently. They are plagued by themselves, and even though they were aware of what they were doing or picturing, they only were capable of doing this because they are human. Robbed of their rationality by the influences of love, they both demonstrate a, quote, nervous sensitivity, an over-refinement, a weariness, and an inquisitiveness, unquote. Quote, Humbert is preoccupied with memory, that dead thing which was once living experience, now resurrected and transmuted by the imagination, unquote. By paraphrasing John Ruskin, Lavisari claims that the pathos of death of young muses only achieves a literary meaning when they were extraordinarily good. She goes on by stating that these two contradictory movements assured that children were given special attention in society and in the family. In the 19th century, death and sexuality bonded and reinforced a double standard. A child's chasteness should be preserved as long as possible, and its sexuality should be infinitely postponed or prevented by an early death. This would assure that the child would never be able to request a sexual life and could evoke erotic fantasies in the adult who nostalgically holds on to his beloved image of his loss of innocence. Humbert mourns his loss of innocence since Annabel died, and the childhood he stole from Lolita. Aschenbach, who finally understands that he is the one dying, mourns that his loss of innocence lies only in the sphere of age and inexperience. He lost it without really losing it.